So let's get straight into it. We'll do all the housework and stuff later on. Let's get straight into it and invite into the show a Northland emergency doctor, Dr. Gary Payinda. Gary, hello again. So good for you to be with us.
Hello, gentlemen. Good evening.
It just feels like yesterday we were talking, Gary. It just feels like yesterday. And here we are again.
Now, before we get into it, Pat, sorry, we've got some admin to do here.
Sure.
Gary, do you have your permission slip from Simeon Brown to speak to us tonight? Just want to make sure that we're all above board.
It's funny you should say that. So the message I want to get to all the doctors out there listening is that if you're speaking in your personal capacity, you are free to do so. I'm not speaking on behalf of Health New Zealand or the hospital I work for or any other organization. I am speaking as an emergency doctor. That's it. And any of us are entitled to speak our mind. And indeed, the SECA, our employment contract, if you're a public salaried doctor, and the Medical Council of New Zealand hugely support us when we talk about issues that are of patient interest. If we are trying to help our patient or patients in general, Medical Council New Zealand says that they not only allow us to talk, they expect that we would speak up on behalf. So there's no government that can intimidate us unless we allow them to intimidate us and self-censor. Now, I understand why some people wouldn't want to talk because they don't want to threaten their advancement or their position, their jobs. But at some point, it gets so egregious that you have to say something. And especially when these news stories are coming out every day or two, one worse than the next, you can either sit by and watch the public health system that you love degrade and be eroded, or you can speak out against it. And I mean, what David Bailey did was extraordinary, and he would not be censured. He's the head of a department, a clinical director of obstetrics and gynecology, really experienced, decent guy. I mean, in full disclosure, he works at the same hospital I work at. We're colleagues, and I've worked alongside him or with him or treating the same sorts of patients for years now. He's a decent dude. And so he was brave to say what he did.
You're rubbing off on him, are you, Gary? Is what happening? You're influencing people, and they're catching a bit of what you've got. Is that what it is?
I almost think it's the other way around. Like, I'm inspired by the stuff people tell me in the hallways, speaking to porters, HCAs, cleaners, heads of department, and those conversations are the inspiration for what I talk about and what I write about on Substack.
Well, let's get into it, shall we? Outsourcing being used to pretend hospital wait times are being fixed. In Northland, 24 patients are set to get their long-awaited gynecology operations, but Dr. David Bailey, your colleague, lead obstetrician gynecologist for the region, said, while it was good news for those patients, it would not fix the chronic underfunding and neglect of the public service over many years. He spoke on Morning Report. I'm just going to play 30 seconds of what he said, and then we want to get your take on all this conversation as well, Gary. Here he is from Morning Report.
Plan will help Northland patients get gynecology surgeries, but the region's lead obstetrician there, David Bailey, says it won't fix years of public health service underfunding.
Had that money been available over the last 12 months, we would have treated many, many more patients than they're going to be doing with this. This is a political move to make them look good.
David Bailey describes the push to go private as entirely ideological.
Throwing large amounts of money to do a small number of procedures in private to make your figures look better, to give the perception that you're actually improving on health targets, is fundamentally dishonest.
Now, last week, Gary, we came across this story, Chewie and I did, and being the ignorant fools that we are, we kind of thought, in fact, I think I said, if this is all it is, if it's just clearing the backlog, that doesn't sound like a bad thing. Patients getting ahead of that backlog doesn't sound like a bad thing. But of course, yourself and your colleague, David, Dr. Bailey, bring maybe a more holistic view to what this money is doing going to these private entities? Would you like to expand?
Yeah, I think Katie Ben put it well. She's a doctor, anesthetist, put it well when asked, why isn't it just a good thing that this $50 million will help people get seen in private? And it seems like a good thing. And if you are a regular person, you'd say, well, I can get my surgery that much quicker. But I think there's 5 or 6 really important reasons for why this is a dangerous precedent, why this actually leads us down the wrong path. So number one is there's a few things you need to understand that regular folks who are not in healthcare may not know. These private hospitals, many of them owned by private equity, which has been shown to utilize understaffing and result in worse outcomes for patients than either not-for-profits or public hospitals. But we'll put that aside for a moment. So you're sending people to actually get worse care. But the more important thing is these companies, again, often private equity owned, are in it to make a profit. And they siphon that profit off. And whatever profit they're making, 10, 15, 20, whatever percent, I've seen some reliable numbers of 20% profits for some of them. That's money that's not going to patient care. That is money that will not directly help a patient. And it's money that's often being offshored. So it won't even help us in the larger sense of building a stronger community.
Well,
The bigger problem.
Hang on, just so we're clear, so people are clear when we give it the number. I know people will know this, but if they're spending 50 million and 20 million is profit, that means they're spending 40 million on surgeries and siphoning 10 million off. 10 million would be 20% on 50.
But it gets worse, Pat, because we know that in private, fees are increased, again, to generate profit. They're not doing it as a community service. They don't have some public ethos. They want to make quarterly profits to report back, right? It's private equity, it's a corporation, that's how it works. And they will try to get as much as they can and deliver as little as they can. And so there's this concept that I think can be summed up as cherry picking or skimming the cream. And it is part and parcel of every public healthcare contract. So if you guys ever get the chance to talk to Simeon Brown, you simply have to ask him, how much money are these hospitals getting to provide the service? And what he will immediately tell you, he's already told journalists, is that it's commercially sensitive. That means it's a commercial secret, a business secret that he can't tell you. Because if he did, you would realize how much money is being made and how much more efficiently the public system could have seen these patients. So that's a couple simple concepts, but it goes deeper than that. Because they're cherry picking, they will only take the healthiest and least sick of that pool of patients. So you have 27,000 patients waiting for surgery, some in dire conditions, right? These ladies that David Bailey, the obstetrician gynecologist, is trying to advocate for, some of them have been waiting longer than a year, bleeding and in pain, okay? And he's trying to advocate for them. But the reality is, and he knows this, when government goes to outsource these patients out to the private sector says, oh, too fat, too high of a BMI, bad diabetes, hypertension, we won't take that. Comorbidities, oh, they've got heart and lung problems. Oh, they have problems with access and travel and poverty that will make follow-up difficult. All of these are reasons why the people who need it most will not get cared for. They're going to be turned down. And the reality is the most complex patients will not even be candidates for this. They will be forced to remain within the public system, not go out in private, while private charges premium rates for it.
Let me ask you about that. Let me ask you about the premium rates, because I haven't thought of this before. Is what you're saying they're actually double dipping? Because they're charging an exponential amount for the scan that they're charging more for than you'd pay for in a public setting, and then on top of that they're making profits as well. So they're actually making profits on the scan, charging more, and then making sure there's a fat profit left over at the end. Are they double dipping?
The simple answer to that is, of course, they are trying to maximize profits by any method they can.
Right.
So, of course, they want the simplest procedures on the healthiest patients that will be in and out of their hospital quickly. But it gets worse, Pat, because if the patient happens to get sick at a private hospital, do you know what they do with them? They
Ship them to the
don't
public.
care. Exactly.
Yeah.
They load them on an ambulance and get them the heck out of there. They end up in a public hospital with a post-surgical complication that the public hospital now has to eat the cost on. There's no clawback of money, nothing like that. The hospital, privates get to keep the profits, but they've externalized the costs back onto the public taxpayer. So we're getting hit by, like, again and again, losing profits, offshoring profits, cherry picking, issues of inequity. If your sickest people are on a waiting list and they can't get service in the private sector, how fair is that to them? Well, it's not. And so it's essentially a way of taking the easiest to care for patients and the most profitable ones and giving that money to private. But it gets worse because private also doesn't train our young doctors. It doesn't have an obligation to train. So not only are they not managing the critical complications of their surgeries, they then put them back on the public, and the public has to absorb all of these costs, training costs and everything else, dealing with high acuity patients. So you have to look at this 50 million that is being taken from the taxpayer purse, right? This is our money, right? It's taxpayer money that's being shifted out to private corporations, right? And yet all of these costs in myriad ways will still be borne by the public system. So David Bailey comes the closest with his honesty to telling you what's really going on, because he's telling you we could have, over the past year, have done a bunch of these surgeries within the public system using public theater and public staff. But we were told that the public system couldn't afford to hire the theater nurses to run theaters on those days. I think they do like weekend clinics, like Saturday cases, to catch up on the lists. So they were told, sorry, we can't do that. And then he looked and he said, well, but you're sending these really simple cases, these easy ones down to Auckland, again, for premium rates. We could have done those locally at much less expense. And, therein lies the awfulness of all of this, is that we could have done it within the public system, but the decision was made. It is better to send that 50 million out there into the private sector. Now, again, it gets worse because the surgeons and anesthetists that are doing these cases are the same ones that work in public by and large. Now, there are some that exclusively work in private. That's not that common. Most split. And so what do you think happens when you have easier cases for higher profit in the public sector and resources being diverted there? So, this is 50 million that will not go to making another operating theater at the local hospital. It's 50 million that will not go to hiring nurses at the public hospital. This money is gone. And so for the person who says, like, oh, this is a great thing, I got done quicker, you have to realize it is leading to the crumbling of the public healthcare sector and to your local hospital and to your staff. Surgeons and other proceduralists and anesthetists will follow the funding where it goes. And so if they can have easier cases for higher rates in private, they will do more cases in private. And, Simeon was asked about that, and he said something like, we've got good people on it, and they're working to ensure it doesn't happen. That's just hot air. That's just words, idle words. The surgeons will leave the public sphere and go to private, just like they have in radiology with all these private imaging centers that are, again, like sort of stealing our public doctors, and they won't come back. It's a sticky thing. If the money's out there and the privates are now getting 50 million, what are they going to do with it? Some of it is they're going to get the CT scanner that we needed. They're going to get the MRI to replace our overworked, aged one. Kaitaia Hospital begging for a CT for a decade. Well, the private imaging centers in town each have them. In some cases, several advanced imaging modalities, CTs, MRIs, PET scans, what you name that sort of thing. It exists in the private sector to the exclusion of the public. And so I want people to understand that private is not private. Almost all of its money is siphoned from the public healthcare sector. Let's just be honest and clear about that. It's not rich people, paying their insurance and getting care. To a huge extent, it is the diversion of taxpayer money into the private sector to great benefit of the corporate owners of those entities. People like Lester Levy, you remember him?
Yeah.
They say they're going to get rid of him, but go look on the company's register. He runs all of Health New Zealand right now. He's like the czar, the king of Health New Zealand, and has done a lot of mischief and made literally billions in cuts to public health care. He owned many private healthcare companies, or was a part owner or a founder of many of them. And I was looking because I was curious. The last I saw, he still had ownership, the last time I looked, of a couple of them that benefit from public monies being diverted into private. He was a part owner, of company director of New Zealand Musculoskeletal Imaging Limited. That ended in September of last year. And then New Zealand Cyclotron, which makes, I think, sort of radionuclide type stuff for advanced testing and treatment. And that relationship ended 36 days ago. So when your head of the public system is owning private healthcare companies, now I can't speak, I don't know if one or both of these gets government money, but we have to admit it's a bad look when privateers are heading up the public system. There's something wrong with that.
Let me just go through. I'm having a look at this company's page right now. There are lots of former directors and former shareholder, but it says Medical and Surgical Contracting Limited, shareholder. It says Australian Health Capital Management Limited, director. It says AAA Orthopedics Limited, director. There's other ones that may be medical, but they're not, don't call it, but there's Medical and Surgical Contracting Limited, director. The Ascot Hospital Management Limited, director. Health Capital Management
So
Limited,
to be fair,
director.
I think you're probably looking at something that's been updated since that webpage went up, because I did read an article where he said before and during, while he's been commissioner or whatever his title is, he's been divesting himself of these things in a staggered fashion.
Well, if that's the case, then the government's got another thing against. I'm searching the companies registry, companies.govt.nz. So I'm looking at the company. I mean, if you ever close a business, that shouldn't take 6 months to get your details off there. That anyway.
Yeah.
We'll I mean,
if you look at the last Minister of Health, Shane Reti, he also has some ownership stakes in businesses. Businesses that, well, are they a conflict of interest if you're making money in the private sector and you're controlling government policy, voting to give, Philip Morris $216 million in tax breaks? I don't know. It needs to be addressed. Like, they could easily come out and say, no, I've divested myself from any private healthcare interest, which obviously is the normal thing to do. Like, maybe this is legal, maybe this is completely legal, totally above board, but it's something that they need to address publicly. And some journalist needs to be brave enough to actually ask them to come clean on this and just be straight up. Because it's not a good look.
Gary, I think you and I should give a chance for Chewie to come in, because he hasn't spoken a word yet, and he's got lots of feels. And I had you last week all to myself.
I'm not getting in the way of this. Just freight train. It seems pretty unstoppable. I mean, we talked right from the get-go about how conflicted, corrupted this national government was by their interest in private healthcare. when they brought on Lester Levy. He has been talking about the benefits of private healthcare for literal decades. So when he was put in charge of Health New Zealand, that was not ever going to be anything other than bad. I think you're 100% right that this is just trying to clear the wait list because the wait lists look bad. And I think it also ties into a narrative of our healthcare system as it stands just can't cope. It's just not good at it. The public system is no good, that we have to go to private to solve the problem. And then they do exactly what you're saying. They go, I'll have that one. That's nice and easy. That'll be quick. Yep, we'll do him, not you. Maybe you, and money, please. But it's that whole narrative that public health can't do it. Parked outside Dunedin Hospital right now is something that I saw the other day and thought, this looks expensive. And I checked in. It is very expensive. It's a big fancy PET scanner truck that Mercy Hospital have purchased, custom built in the Netherlands for $7 million. And I'm sure
I might not have any problem with that if that 7 million was raised privately, you know, for the benefit of whatever, for their own use. But the reality is, where do you think this money for all these PET scanners and CTs and MRIs in private is coming from? It's coming from the diversion of desperately needed taxpayer monies, taxpayer funds, to the private sector. Now, they say they're doing a service. You know, they say they're doing a service to the nation, treating these patients that need care. But if they're going to sell you that line, you have to be able to know if what you're getting is a good deal or if you're getting screwed as a nation. And because they operate in secrecy, right, commercially sensitive, that is just an abhorrent thing to me, that we would be spending taxpayer money and not knowing what we're getting. How much are they taking out as profit that patients will never see care from? How much are they charging? So this colleague at my hospital, David Bailey, said that he and his department could do these cases cheaply within the public system, and we're willing to, but we're not allowed to, right? For want of paying for a theater nurse. And so you have to just ask yourself, where is this money going, and why will no one tell us the truth about what the numbers are? So show us, this is my challenge to these private healthcare people, to Simeon really, because it's his baby, isn't it? Show us we're getting value for money. Show us the numbers. Tell us how many. So David said the numbers are tiny. The patients are cherry picked. They will only do the easiest of the easy cases. And in the grand scheme of things, this is just buffing the numbers up a little bit so they look a bit better at an enormous cost. What could our hospital have done with $50 million? Probably could have done a lot. Probably could have treated a huge number of patients that we now will not be able to. So yeah, it's messed up.
Yeah, so
messed up, Chewie.
What could that 50 million have done in the public sector? Sorry, hiring people to then be able to fill those gaps. I just want to say one more thing about Lester Levy as well, and this is no casting aspersions, but just to let us all know, people who aren't sort of involved around businesses and what they do, he has been, and I'm pretty sure there's no other Lester Levy's the same. He has been, or is currently, a shareholder or a board or a director of 64 businesses, because that's how many are listed on the company's website that are either currently in his name or have previously been in his name. So even if they're not all medical, you can just see that man is soaking in the world of capitalism and private business.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he is a private profit generating machine. He is a force in New Zealand, and you know, he should be thanking the taxpayers for all of the money that they have inadvertently and unknowingly diverted towards his businesses over the year, without ever seeing the numbers and the data to back it up, because it's all a commercial secret, and will remain so until we get a government willing to say, nope, this is full openness, full transparency, the books are there for you.
I don't want to kind of end this on a naive point, but I think you said 3 times tonight, it gets worse, Pat. I think so. Certainly twice. Is there anything that we can look forward to where you might go, it gets better? Like, honestly, is there anything on the horizon where Dr. Gary Payinda might think it gets better, or is there literally nothing at the moment?
I mean, it's like they say with bleeding in patients, right? All bleeding stops. It eventually.
Yeah, right.
So no, there is no good news for this because the motive underlying it is privatization. I've been saying this for a year now. Defund, destabilize, privatize. Started saying that a year ago. It's still true. It's going to be true 2 years from now when this group wraps up. Defund essential public services. Watch them destabilize in real time before your eyes, crumbling, and then privatize. And you just bring in a white knight. If I have a minute, can I tell you about what the RNZ investigative journalists found? I think it was yesterday.
Palliative care amongst pediatrics, that one.
Yeah.
Look, we'll just sit back and give you a runway because you gave us a bit of this before we started. So this is a story we haven't foretold, Fano. But Gary, please tell us how it gets worse another time.
So yeah, it gets worse. They've been telling us, the current government has been telling us for a long time now that the cuts they made, 1.4 billion initially under Lester Levy, and then more and more and more over time, wouldn't affect patient services, it wouldn't affect patient care, and wouldn't affect frontline staffing and frontline services. Now, anyone in healthcare, I mean, I can't speak for all of us, but the vast majority of all the colleagues I have ever spoken to about this know that that's a falsehood. It's just a blatant I think I can say lie, misrepresentation, untruth. Of course, these cuts affect patient care. They affect patient care every single day because there is no true back office. There are people who support the frontline workers.
Yeah.
But just because they don't lay their hands on patients doesn't mean their work's not essential. You can't kill 1 in every 2 IT and data jobs and expect things to be okay for patients and for staff and for flow. You saw what happened with public health when I was talking to you last time. You can't fire 1 in every 4 public health workers and expect there to be a functional public health service at the end of that massacre, right? But let's just get back onto this story. This has been incredible. And I'm not kidding when I say I need to be talking about this every day, because every day we're getting horrific stories. So there's one public palliative care specialist in pediatrics in the country. I think there might be another one in private on the South Island, but this is the only public one in the nation. And that person went on extended leave for whatever reason. I have no idea. So this is a pretty important role. It's trying to manage through the use of complex procedures and complicated medication regimes and other things. It tries to manage kids that are dying and try to make their death a little bit less painful and symptomatic. So it's an important role. That person's on extended leave. There's a specialist nurse leaving in March that just does like his pediatric palliative care, and then another nurse position that's already vacant. RNZ went to Health New Zealand and said, wow, this sounds really bad that kids are suffering because the people that manage this very specialized thing, their positions are unfilled. And RNZ was assured that the positions are being recruited for. We are looking for a pediatric palliative care specialist. Okay, fine, face value, good. Hours later, so that afternoon, RNZ investigative journalists happened to notice, that there was no ad for a pediatric palliative care specialist, but now there is one. It was just put out that afternoon after the story broke. But it was weird because it was an ad for a general pediatrician with a specialty interest in palliative care. So a general pediatrician, they've already got some of those working in pediatric palliative care, but they can't do, and they've said they don't feel comfortable doing everything that a fully trained an experienced specialist would be doing, right?
Mm.
They're doing the best they can. They're good. They got good skills, but there needs to be one of these specialists. So RNZ calls up Health New Zealand and says, hey, what's up? Were you guys like lying or just made a mistake when you said that you had advertised for someone to fill this position that you've known about for a while, this extended leave problem, leaving the country hanging? And, Health New Zealand then didn't answer the question, but then changed the ad after that second conversation to say experienced palliative care specialist wanted. So are these people scamming us? Are they making it up as they go along? People like me would say yes. People like me would say that this whole frontline versus back office thing is a made up political thing. And people like me would say that virtually everyone in public healthcare right now in all your hospitals knows that there was a hiring freeze. Now, the government has been saying for ages, no hiring freeze. We know there's awful shortages of doctors and nurses, and we're doing everything in our power to hire them. Of course, that's not true. You can get away with saying it's not a hiring freeze if you trickle through a few hires. And so I've got colleagues in nursing, for example, that say we have 45 vacant nurse spots. We are allowed to recruit 2, to advertise for 2 a fortnight. So it's kind of like the police thing you were talking about a minute earlier in your intro. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that there's a hiring freeze. It would be nice to have some honesty. I could respect them more if they just said, yep, we spent 2.9 billion on property investors to make their lives better, and all this money on tax cuts for people that needed it least.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to do things like cut benefits for beneficiaries and the disabled. We have to put a hiring freeze on our doctor and nurse positions. We've got managers in nursing who say that they know a person is going to be taking maternity leave, and by the time they get the position advertised, let alone filled, the maternity leave that person requested is already half to 2/3 over.
Wow.
And then they're told, because that person's going to be coming back soon in just a few months, we don't need to advertise it right now. We can't fill it. So, I mean, how patently absurd is that? And it's not like, I talk to a lot of people. It's not just 1 or 2 folks saying this. This is rampant throughout New Zealand within the public system. We're being told one thing. It's gaslighting. You're being told that there's we're recruiting and we're hiring and this and that, but your eyes don't lie. You know that the call rosters are emptier. You know that there's fewer people to cover sick leave. You know that when you go to hire someone new in a department, they don't get their contract for a really, really long time, months and months and months. And these international doctors that we look at say, I can't wait 6 months for a contract, and I've got to choose a job somewhere else. So I'll call it a hiring freeze. If Simeon wants to come and speak to any of this, I'd be more than happy to talk to him for hours about this. I have a lot of time for this because this is what matters to me. This is very important. And when you have huge numbers of psychiatrists missing in your psychiatry department, I've got a patient in a room waiting for 12 or 18 hours to get reviewed, to get admitted, because there's not enough beds, because there's not enough capacity, because there's not enough nurses hired on the surgical ward, the medical ward. When these things are happening, it's very, very real for me, and exceptionally real for my patients. Like, for me, it's an inconvenience, but for patients, it makes a difference in their life and in their outcome and in their health. And so I would like the opportunity to have an honest discussion for an hour or two with Simeon or Lester Levy or Shane or any of these people. And if they don't want to talk to me, that's fine. Talk to one of the other doctors, Katie Ben, David Bailey or others. You could find lots of people who had direct experience who would absolutely confront them with the reality of the situation on the ground. And I would just like them to stop telling untruths.
Yeah, and can I say, Gary, thanks so much for joining us again today. Someone in the chat said, "Oh, Gary, twice in 2 weeks. It must be real bad." Here it is here. Gary, twice in a fortnight. Things are that bad, huh? And I guess what you're saying and we're hearing is, yes, they are. But the only thing I was going to add to it was this is now also the job of the media. When the government or Simeon Brown says there is no hiring freeze, the questions need to be, how many short are we? We've been told it's 45 at this hospital. If there's no hiring freeze, how long until we fill those 45 positions? Because if they say there's no hiring freeze and they're doing, as you say, one a week, one a fortnight, one a month, technically that's correct. That's like saying gang numbers coming down. If it comes down by one gang member, yeah, gang numbers have come down, but it makes not much of a difference because that's what we have to drive into. So that's where the media can come in and be a part of this conversation to at least hopefully get some real answers if you're not going to offer them easily.
And remember the magic word that politicians use, budgeted. They will say, we have filled up all our budgeted positions. You must ask them, what is the real need? How many nurses do we need to make these wards work to a minimal safety standard or like a standard of care that's acceptable? And then ask them why they're not meeting those numbers. And then ask them, if they say we don't have money, ask them where the money went. Because I can tell you where 19 billion with a B of it has gone.
Yeah. Hey, Gary, thanks so much for joining us again tonight. Really important information, albeit I get the sense that this is weighing heavily on you for obvious reasons. But thank you for, doing what you do. Everyone in the chat saying the same thing and making us aware as to what's going on. If we're informed with what's going on, maybe we can inform others. Maybe we can do something to help at least make this group of, I think you called them vandals the last time we talked, accountable for their actions. So thank you.
And I want to put a thank you out there to you guys for doing this, for letting this become a news item, because it's an important story that affects a lot of people. And special thanks to David Bailey, this consultant, clinical director of obstetrics and gynecology, who was willing to actually call it out as what it is, and an encouragement to others throughout the country to do the same. The Public Doctors Union was also very good because they stepped up and said, we support what these doctors are saying. It's the truth and we back them up on it. So good on them.
Cool. Thank you again. And we'll be in touch super soon, eh?
You're welcome.
All right.
Talk to you later, Chewie. Bye, Pat.